Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inlay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and back with us is my good friend, Mr. Peter MacIsaac. How's it going, Peter?
Having just a great time, Payment.
Yeah, I see you're in the forest, the nice, clean, fresh air.
That's just a backdrop, buddy. I'm at my office headquarters, to tell you the truth, and that's a backdrop. But if I
Sorry,
had my brothers, that's where I'd be.
I'm working on my dad jokes. Apologies for the terrible joke. So for the audience, Peter, you are a professional forest firefighter, and you're also a best-selling author. So why don't we start there? If you could tell us first, tell me, when did you write the book, and how much of what you predicted in there came true?
Uh, well, to be honest with you, Payment, I started the book over 6 years ago and never had a finish for it. And I know people don't want to just hear people complain. So as things started to progress here over the last year, we finally down in Nova Scotia come up with a solution to a lot of the problems. And basically, what my book does is it's humor mixed with ideology, and it's kind of a buckle up. Let's get the truth told, and it's highly politically incorrect. But I laid out how I went from being I was never really woke, but how I became completely awake as to what was happening inside government. And everything that I basically predicted in that book that I think was released in May of last year is either coming to pass or in the process of getting worse. And the only salvation I see was predicted inside that book. And then I also offer a solution to the problems that we face. So it's a real good read. It's getting a 5-star rating. The problem is that the government doesn't want you to read it, so it's heavily suppressed. But you can get it on Amazon, and you can get it Audible or ebook. And if you pick up a copy, and I happen to run in anywhere with you, I'm more than happy to have a coffee and sign a copy of your book. Fairly easy to get a hold of.
Where do you start your story? Like, where in the book, where do you start noticing Canada going astray?
Early 90s. So what happened, Payment, is my dad was. I grew up on an army basis till I was 11. My dad was a soldier, and one of the things that I spent my first 5 years in Germany as a child, and one of the fun things we used to do was play in bomb craters because Germany was full of them around, and there was all still busted up vehicles and lots of stuff like that, right? But I came back from there with my parents, and they had a very conscientious view of what socialism can morph into, and the long-lasting results that it can how much damage it can do to a society. And so I grew up with that in my home my entire life. But I was like every kid, I grew up on East Canada's East Coast in Nova Scotia, and we were just rednecks having a good time basically my entire life, not paying attention to politics until I started working inside the provincial government. And I had a 29-year career in that I was a game warden and a wildlife specialist, but a big part of that was professional forest firefighting. And because I was inside government, the amount of corruption that I saw and the amount of daily lying, that just became every day. As a matter of fact, it stopped registering with me. It was that common.
I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know if you can answer it. It's not an easy one. You said everything you started seeing it going downhill in the 90s. So that means that whoever was in charge in the 90s, they probably went to school in the 60s and 70s. Do you think that the education system polluted their minds in the 60s and 70s?
It really started I would say, Payment, probably in around the mid-'80s. In the mid-'80s, in the education system, a very critical thing happened, and it happened all across North America, and I'm not sure about Europe. But inside the school system, I had little kids in there at the time, and the system changed that if you fought back against a bully, you got penalized. When I went to school back in the 60s and 70s, you were expected to fight back against bullying, being shoved around by people. And if you fought back, the bully got penalized, and you kind of got a reward, and you were kind of a local class hero for standing up to the bully. Well, that changed in the mid-'80s all across North America, inside the school system. And what happened, there was an about face where everybody started to say, no, there's zero violence policy. So if you were pushed around by a bully and you fought back, you got suspended as well as the bully. and you got punished for standing up for what was right. And we have generations now of children beginning in the mid 80s that were taught not to fight back, because if you do, what's going to happen to you is worse. It will be equal to the punishment that you'll get for blowing the whistle on the bully or fighting or standing up and fighting for what's right. So that started in the 80s. And then in the 90s, here in Canada, there was a Sikh gentleman who wanted to wear his ceremonial garb, which was his dirk.
I think that was in BC. That was a BC court case.
That's right. And so what happened was the court was being packed by liberal hacks, and someone veered a little too far to the left and decided, okay, you don't have to wear regular uniform. Well, the term uniform means everybody needs to be in uniformity. And when that changed, that opened the door to that was the real start of DEI in Canada, where all of a sudden every minority group had to be treated in a special fashion. And at that point, people stopped being hired based on meritocracy. For years in the RCMP, the next number of years, the only way to get hired, you had to be a minority group, or you had to be part of the alphabet soup group, or you had to be part of something other than a straight, white, male Christian, right? Who was just up until that point in time, they were looking for 6 foot tall, tough guys to go in and enforce the law. And then we started taking in, 5 foot tall people that were overweight, and you got in based on your ethnicity and a whole bunch of other factors. And basically the bottom dropped out of it all, because now in all federal government offices and all provincial government offices running all government in Canada are packed by DEI hires. And I talk about it extensively in the book. And I noticed that south of the border, the folks down there have had enough. And Donald Trump just said, that's it. DEI shut it all down. Military, all government agencies, it's over. Now up here in Canada, they're doubling down. Rather than say, their handwriting's on the wall, we're destroying our society, they just decided to double down. But that's when it started back in the mid 90s.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead here. I feel like Trump is trying to dismantle globalism, and the globalists are trying to plant in Mark Carney and double down on globalism. What do you foresee is going to happen in Canada?
So Mark Carney is a WEF globalist operative who was put in to do two things. And one is to bring in a digital ID, which the government has already, you can go on their websites and find data that they support a digital ID. And secondly, because he's a bankster, is to bring in a central bank digital currency. Two things. And what people don't realize is if he gets 3 or 4 months as an interim prime minister, he can get that done in that time frame. Plus, he can also extend the election for another year. That's most people think that we have to go to an election in October. We don't. He can push it down the road. So you got to remember now, here's a man who was kicked out of the UK for the damage he did to their economic system, and he's coming over here with a background of failure. And he hangs around with a pretty seedy crowd. I've seen pictures of him with folks from, down at Epstein Island, Michelle or Ghislaine Maxwell. I've seen pictures of him with Prince Andrew. And sometimes in that crowd, you're kind of known for who you hang around with. So I'm looking at a guy here, like I said, he's the Conservative Party put out a great video lately talking about liberal wackos. Well, not only is he a wacko, I mean, he's probably the most dangerous man to enter politics in Canada in the last 30 years.
Probably the most dangerous since Pierre Elliott Trudeau unleashed, socialism and central banking.
So here's the other thing, Payman. He's also partnered up with Gerald Butts. Gerald Butts is a guy that Maclean's magazine about 10 years ago says one of the four most influential people in Canadian politics. When he first went to work with Justin Trudeau as one of his chief advisors, he stayed on the payroll of the World Wildlife Fund for 3 years, taking in major 6-figure income, being paid by them while he was on the payroll of the taxpayer, advising Justin Trudeau. And I watched him on video on 3 different occasions, said, my only goal is to stamp out all carbon producing companies in Canada. And that's the guy who's been whispering in his old buddy Justin's ear since he's been in politics. So now you've got Gerald Butts, and they're doing the arm around one another secret handshakes along with Klaus Schwab, and that threesome is the worst possible thing that's happened in Canadian politics since I've been born, and I'm 66 years old.
Okay, for one follow-up question. If Carney does this, I don't see Trump standing by, first of all. And secondly, with these tariffs coming and businesses fleeing the country, what's going to happen if he implements UBI, CBDCs, and digital IDs?
You mean from Trump's perspective?
Well, I just don't like. Trump isn't going to put boots on the ground, but he's not going to be like, "Oh man, Carney got in. Well, I tried. Better luck for me next time."
Whoops. I think what's going to end up happening, and maybe I'm wrong on this, is I'm thinking that probably what you're going to end up seeing is as soon as tariffs kick in, the government's going to be forced to do a number of things. I don't believe that the U.S. government will negotiate with anybody in the Liberal Party in regards to tariffs. I'm thinking that Trump is going to say, look, you guys are in the midst of what looks like it's coming up to an election. This is too important to your country. I may hold off, but you're going to have to go to an election here within the next 30 days. Basically, he's calling the shots around the world like now. I just watched what he did to Colombia in the last few days, right? I mean, that negotiation took less than 24 hours. And not only he had everything he wanted and more, he even got to the point that Colombia is using their own planes to come pick him up and haul him away now. So anybody that comments about what Trump's doing and hasn't read The Art of the Deal probably should go read The Art of the Deal. And then the other book they should read is the Sun Tzu, The Art of War, because the man has studied both of them, and he's a genius at the pair of them. And basically, he set up the liberal government to make sure that Trudeau's gone. And I don't believe that he'll sit back and watch Carney bring in the carnage that Carney was put here to bring. So we're going to start calling them Carnage Carney, right? So Carnage Carney. I mean, and you got to remember, every circus needs a Carney.
So I guess this is a good time to transition to talking about the forest fires, the disaster in California. Let's leave the disaster in Canada behind for now.
Yeah. So, and I talk about it continually in my book, is the results of DEI hiring are in your face now to the point of somewhere between 150 and $250 billion damage, and 250,000 people now that are without places to live in California as a result of DEI hiring policy and long-term cascading descent into basically what's turned out to be lunacy. So what we have down there now is a perfect storm of and a direct predictable result of over a long period of time putting people in positions of power who have no business being there. And it's like I understand that the left thought they were doing a good thing. And if you pick a person based on all the DEI requirements and you put them in and their job is making pizza, and they screw up your pizza. Well, that's a lot different than putting someone in charge of forest firefighting. And when they screw up, your home burns down, your town burns down. And the problem is there was no delineation. So irregardless of how critical the job positions were because of DEI hiring, and down in my province, Nova Scotia, that's legislation. You have to make hires in Nova Scotia inside the government based on DEI. Same thing in the federal government. I'm not sure in BC, but I'm assuming it's probably, I'm looking at the mess out there. A lot of it has to point to DEI hiring. So I spent, I put a lot of hours in watching what was happening down in LA on the fires. And there were job offers for guys with my background to go down and get paid up to $1,000 an hour to go in and protect homes that didn't have insurance on a multi-million-dollar mansions. They were looking for people that were willing to come in. But what you were dealing with down there was a perfect storm that was years in the making. And I'm going to point out straight up that amount of screw ups can't all be blamed on incompetence. So here's what we had a perfect storm of that happened down in LA. We had mismanagement. We had water mismanagement. We had timber mismanagement. We had insurance mismanagement. We had firefighting mismanagement. We had government mismanagement at all levels. We had DEI hires in every critical position that needed to be in there. You had somebody who was not qualified in that position. And like I say, if that's just somebody who screws up your order at Tim Hortons, then that doesn't kill you. But what happens is when you have top tier of people who have no idea what they're doing, you can look down there. And not only that, even since the fires have started, Payman, they haven't learned a single lesson, because I was watching more footage again today. And it's not that they've improved. They've just doubled down on the stupid. It's absolutely staggering. You know, the Santa Ana winds down there are predictable. Now they've had rain over the weekend. The massive incompetence that there was, I mean, they knew that they would get mudslides. They knew that they were going to have, there was no hillside management. There was nothing put in place. I mean, you know that if this particular slope burns on the next big rains, it's going to come down the block highways. They can, there's all different things that engineers can do to prepare for that. And what happened is the folks down there continually voted in morons to run the state. And then they continue to, you know, I look at the mayor down there in Palisades. I mean, you know, I watched a lot of data that said she got voted in based 100% on DEI. And even to this day, she is sticking to her guns. She hasn't learned a single lesson. And so that's what happens is I'll give you an example that most people can probably relate to. Okay, let's say you have a room, and inside that room, there's 20 chairs, and there's seats for 20 people, and all 20 people are going to be, they're going to be tasked with running, let's say, your province. Let's say it could be any industry. Okay, and then you go downtown and you round up 20, you go down to a circus and you gather up 20 clowns. And you put 20 clowns and you fill all chairs with 20 clowns. You don't have to be Kreskin, that guy who used to be the fortune teller there, the real famous fortune teller who recently died. If you put 20 clowns in a room and let them run anything, there's a 100% guarantee you're going to get a circus. So I'm watching down in LA and I'm going, well, you know, I wonder if it was this. And every single thing that I looked at, because I'm an investigator, I was game warden for 29 years, is when you look at that stuff, the overwhelming preponderance of evidence points consistently to clowns creating a circus. But you can't blame it all on that, because what happens is then you have to ask a question, who appointed the clowns? Because that was strategic. If you put 20 clowns in a room, you know there's going to be a disaster. So my biggest question is who hired these people? Because they're at a level where the other people above them can stand back and say, well, this was a gross negligence, or this was, you know, we obviously hired the wrong people. Well, I could see that if it was 3 out of 10 people or 4 out of 10, but when it's 10 out of 10 or 100 out of 100, and every place that you go and talk to people, not one single person is competent. I mean, that's an absolute predictable disaster in the making. And like I say, I don't see any improvement. The greatest thing happened was Trump went down there this week. I don't know if you caught it. And he had a meeting with Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Palisades. And he said, look, I'm not giving you a blank check. We have the money. We want to help out. But you've got to fix this mess. Right? You've got no water in no water in fire hydrants. You've got empty dikes. You've got 100 fire trucks parked inside compounds that need safety inspections, and they're not ready to roll because you cut the budget and there's no mechanics to fix your trucks. You had 60 trucks roll down from Oregon with veteran teams of firefighters, and you send them to Sacramento to get safety inspections on their trucks before you let them in there. I'm looking at one of the most effective tools for fighting forest fires is foam that gets mixed in with your water with Wajax pumping systems, and all these homes that had pools, and nobody had any of the basics that they needed basically to look after the phones. There was no sprinkler systems. There was no foam. And so I started watching these buildings burn down, and I'm waiting. Okay, I'd see a fire truck pull in and I'd say, well, they must be going to foam these homes down so they don't burn to the ground. And it was just, it was such a disastrous clown show that when that offer come up, I turned down. That's a lot of money to turn down, $1,000 an hour. Guys down there for a week, you're going to make a pretty decent chunk of change. But dead men tend not to cash checks. And so the other thing that most people didn't notice, so I've talked to some doctors about this, was I watched the amount of particulates in the air that are going to poison a lot of those firefighters that nobody's even talking about. Remember when 911 happened and a bunch of those guys that were on the ground and breathed in all that dust, they ended up with monumental health problems. They died from multiple cancers and all kinds of things. Well, when you go to a structure fire, the firefighters that fight structure fires are completely trained on different things and have different equipment in a lot of cases, similar but different equipment than a forest firefighter. Forest firefighters predominantly deal with smoke from burning forests and forest debris. But you got to look in Palisades. There's over 12,000 homes burnt to the ground. And I was watching that black smoke, and I was watching hundreds and hundreds of guys with no safety gear at all, at breathing apparatuses, breathing that stuff in, man. That's stuff that if you're exposed to for 10 minutes can give you long-term health problems. And I watched guys standing in there all day, day after day after day, breathing that stuff in from those burned homes, these firefighters. And I'm going, the level of incompetence here is so overwhelmingly staggering. You could pay me $100,000 a day, I wouldn't go down there and work in that. And not one person in the press or any other place has brought that up yet. And I'm telling you, they've only lost 28 people in the fires, but the real death toll will come over the next few years of the amount of people that breathed in those toxic fumes for day in and day out, fighting that stuff. And I'm watching them doing it again today. Nobody's learned anything yet.
Peter, I'm going to ask you some basic questions. That reservoir, the massive reservoir that ended up being empty, why was it empty?
So what ended up happening, the person who was put in charge of making sure that water supply for fire was in place. And it's why there was no water in fire hydrants and why that reservoir was empty. That was a DEI hire person and paid $750,000 a year to make sure there was water in those things. So what happened is there was a person with little or no experience, or maybe, and they might have had somebody, with some intelligence or experience, give them advice. And because they're a DEI hire and didn't know any better, they just ignored it. So what happened, there was a cover on there. And don't get me wrong, there was a repair required on that reservoir that was closest to Palisades. But they didn't have to drain that water till the day they were ready to do the repairs. And what most people aren't aware of, there was what they call I believe it's down there, they call it a red flag warning, that they knew the potentiality for major forest fires was imminent. They could have taken and placed fire trucks in areas and been prepared, ready to roll, knowing that given the amount of homeless people that they have down there, which is in the thousands, the bulk of the fires that are being started are started by arson. Or it's people that are, homeless people, and they get a cooking fire, one thing going, the conditions are terrible. And one thing, one of the things that people do a lot of amphetamines is they kind of get turned on lighting fires in the bushes. It's just one of those things. It's like a side effect of doing a lot of meth, crackheads. So they get a ton of fires, they're expected. And the people that are supposed to prepare for all this, it's like having a general put in charge to prepare for war. And, rather than prepare for war, you've got everybody down at the salon getting their nails done. Right? And, getting fitted for dresses or high heels when they should be gearing up, how to go in and kill a guy with a bayonet. So what's happened is the level of incompetence is normally, Peyton, if it wasn't all DEI, all prior to the DEI hirings, you'd get a backstop. Like might get one person who's an idiot, but they'd get found out in short order. But normally they'd have 2 or 3 people subordinate to them that weren't DEI hires. And if the boss screwed up really bad, there'd be somebody in the background there to save their ass. That doesn't happen now, because one idiot screws up and they surround themselves with more idiots, and everybody's caught in this middle of this. And in the end, everybody's looking at one another going, what should we do? And nobody knows. And then even when they try to call in the experts, a lot of the experts are DEI hires as well. So you got to remember that's seeped into society so that started in the mid 90s. So, we're over 30 years of that now. So virtually all upper echelon folks in many of these government positions, especially in California, they've got no business being there. And, I 100% agree with what's happening in the US has to happen in Canada, because it's going to happen here again this summer in Canada. You mark my words, 100%, take it to the bank. The amount of fires that we're going to have here, because the problems are not being solved. The federal government, when you look at the Jasper fires, as far as to my knowledge, not one person's been fired. I wouldn't be surprised if people were promoted. Got to remember, Payman, when the big fires happened in Jasper, there was a team of 50 professional forest fires showed up with 20 pieces of heavy equipment. And the feds would not allow them to fight fires, and they stood back, watch homes burn to the ground in Jasper. Most people aren't aware of that. That's the type of stuff from my background. I look at all these things and go, I'm looking going, don't get me wrong, there's nothing more exciting than a big campaign fire when you're working on it. I mean, it's nothing but adrenaline. But even the fires that they're having now, if they didn't have the level of equipment, especially the aerial attack equipment that would have, you'd see, man, I watched the just slightly averted disaster last week where, would have been 4,000 people jammed in one road, that the fire trucks had blocked the only escape entrance getting out of there, and they had a major fire heading in that direction. And the people in charge of evacuation screwed everything up. They had fire trucks in the middle of the road rather than everyone to the far right off the road. So they had what's called egress and ingress. And it was all blocked. And I'm looking at it, I'm sitting at home saying, I wish I had a phone. I could call and say, you need to get this mess cleared up. Because I'm thinking if that makes it over the ridge, those people are dead. And they just had, had some really good equipment, and they've got some real good operators, some of the people that they brought in. But the problem on big fires and those things, the same thing in the military. If your general's an idiot, everybody gets killed, right? They used to have a fix for that in Vietnam. It was called fragging your management. And that's where when you get out in front of you, you get accidentally shot and you kind of cleared the field of them. Well, you can't really do that today. I think that's frowned on. But the reality of it is nobody's coming in firing these people. And we need the same thing in Canada has to happen that needs to happen down in LA. So Trump is not going to give them the money that they need unless they make changes.
What about the insurance aspect? Do you think the insurance companies, I don't want to be conspiratorial, but they kind of knew that this was going to happen? Or is this just they're really good at their jobs, they saw the incompetence, and they canceled fire insurance for homes?
I agree with you on that. There was one of the biggest companies canceled 69% of all fire policies in those areas, knowing that this was going to happen. So a lot of people said, well, we'll take the risk. Because you got to remember, a lot of people in Palisades own 3 or 4 homes, right? I mean, there's some you talk about heavy hitters with big money in the US, a lot of them were stacked in the Palisades. But like stupid little things, they stopped doing property inspections when COVID started, going out and saying, clean up the brush around your house. Every single thing that could go wrong went wrong. Everything that I've looked at. I haven't seen a single thing done right. You can't blame the insurance companies for having good guys, good actuaries that start looking at the data and go, no, this place is set to burn down. We're canceling the policies. And then the government of LA made some changes to water flow to protect some fish. Then I find out that they made some changes to the forest fire fighting foam regulations because they're worried they might get some runoff that might affect the fish somewhere. So meanwhile, you rack up 150 to 250 billion. That's $250 billion out the window. And to date, not one single person, to my knowledge, has been fired. Even that DEI hire, one of the fire chiefs there, that, she just come right out and said, look, someone said, well, shouldn't a firefighter be in enough shape that they can rescue a person from a burning fire? And she said, well, it's kind of more important that somebody shows up that they can relate to me and I look like them and they're happy. And if you're in a house that's burning down, you made some bad choices. You're in the wrong place. And she didn't back down from that. She didn't get fired. The only person they tried to fire was one fire chief gal who said, look, they let us down. They cut $17.4 million out of a budget after a letter was sent saying, we have a tinderbox here. This place is going to burn down. And then they started making cuts everywhere. And then you find out, another $100 million was removed from budgets. Got to remember down in LA, I think in the last number of years, they spent something like $23 billion on homeless people. And meanwhile, they're cutting $100 million out of fire budgets, another $17 million here. I mean, I know for a fact, if you go to a fire hydrant and you hook up your stuff and no water comes out of the hydrant, that's not a good day, right? When you think things are supposed to be done and you land in it, and everything was on red alert, like all across Canada, they have a fire ranking system. Every natural resource office, they post fire weather index online every day. It's all predictable. Everything that happened in LA was predictable. And I can tell you, because Canada right now has not reduced their DEI hiring policies, there's a 100% guarantee it's going to continue to happen and get worse in Canada.
Let's put a pin in that. There's a question from the audience. We'll get to the Canada one. Wolf says, I'd be curious to know your guest's take on the Quebec fires that seemingly started simultaneously.
So that was back in 2023. There was between 13 to 15 of them started within minutes of one another. So what your audience needs to know is that when those fires started, there was no lightning. There was no reason those fires should have started. And they were from one side to the other over 1,000 kilometers apart on those fires. Well, down in New York at the time, there was an international gathering on climate change. And the wind on that particular day happened to be blowing from southern Quebec right down into New York. And the smoke from those fires stayed down there on the skyline for over a week. And that was the number one headline, that fires are burning. We have a climate disaster. And Justin Trudeau, I mean, he was happy as a person could be, because it drove the climate agenda that he was pushing and justified in his mind, and to everybody, that he was telling the woods were burning down, that it was okay to slap us with another carbon tax increase. So I was asked by people to have a look at that video that he's talking about, and I'm a forest fire investigator. So I have to go in after fire starts and determine point of origin and the cause. So without being on the ground, I contacted some people I knew in the military and had them look at it as well. And I said, what I'm looking at here is well-coordinated military action. That's what it looks like to me, a well-coordinated military action firestorm set up to do what the military is trained to do, because the military is trained to use fire as a military tactic. And they have incendiary devices that they can start fire with that can be remotely activated that will leave no trace. And they could be halfway up a tree, even if they start a fire. And if somebody went in 3 weeks earlier and planted a device, it'd just look like a lightning strike and you wouldn't be able to tell it. So all those fires ignited almost simultaneously. And then that smoke blew down into Quebec, and it fit the narrative of a huge climate change agenda. And, matter of fact, when these fires were burning in LA, Justin Trudeau was doing a trip coast to coast in the US, blaming those fires down there on climate change. I'll categorically tell your audience that the fires in LA have nothing to do with climate change. Climate down there is predictable. They have the exact same thing. They have rainy seasons and drought seasons. They have the Santa Ana winds. I trained in the early 90s on how to fight fires down on the California mountains, because they're very similar to the mountains that we had in the Cape Breton Highlands in Nova Scotia. And nothing's changed. All the weather charts haven't changed. It's got nothing to do with climate change. It's got to do with, to me, calculated incompetence set up to create this result. And your audience also needs to know that the preponderance of the evidence that I looked at pointed to all those fires, those 13 fires in Quebec, as being arson. And I haven't seen anything yet to refute it.
What about, didn't Danielle Smith come out and make a whole stink about how she was investigating some arsons? Did anything come of that?
What happens is things have changed since roughly beginning in 2010 in Canada. They don't have near as many forest fires investigators as they originally had. And so what happens is a lot of times the source of fire, the cause of a fire, is listed as unknown. Most of the unknowns are arson. And you don't want to call them arson because it doesn't fit a federal narrative of climate change. So you have to look at across Canada, for example, coast to coast. Every province has been systematically cutting their firefighting budget since 2010, which is the exact opposite of what you would expect if a country is saying we're dealing with climate change and we expect more forest fires. We actually have fewer fires, but they burn bigger because they don't have the equipment to be on scene as rapidly as required. Here's what happens, payment. When a fire gets started, the faster you can get on it, the smaller you can keep it. The goal is to try to keep fires under 10 acres, if you can at all. Because once they blow out beyond that, you can lose control of them really, really quick, especially in high winds. And so what happened down in LA, they didn't have people positioned to be able to respond. And when the fires first started, Joe Biden was down there and they had what's called a NOTAM, which is a no-fly zone. And when they needed initial helicopter attack, initial aerial attack, a lot of what should have been sent out wasn't sent out. Now, after that was lifted, they could start to, but the damage was done. And so the same thing's happening here in Canada. In Nova Scotia, we don't have the same firefighting capabilities we had when I retired from DNR back in 2012. And I watched what happened in Alberta and I watched what happened in BC. And now Alberta is trying to make amends and fix some of the problems that they had and trying to boost things back up. But I remember them, the best firefighters in Canada actually at the, around 2015, 16 came out of Alberta and they were called RAP teams, rappel teams. They flew in what was called medium helicopters, and there'd be like a 6-man team, and they'd rappel down into areas that we couldn't get vehicles into. And they'd have fire pumps, and they'd take action on a fire before ground crews could get in. And sometimes they could keep a fire as small as 4 or 5 acres, or even smaller. And then by the time the ground crews got in, you kept it that. But I watched down in LA, one of those fires they couldn't get people on. It went from in 2 hours, it went from 0 to 5,000 acres that quick. And if you don't have the men and the equipment and the expertise, that's what happens. And I'm watching it. I've watched it all across Canada, and I'm watching it. LA is you can go turn on your TV right now and watch the results of what I'm talking about. And it's going to happen here again because nothing has been fixed.
I have a basic question. Forest fires happen all over. They don't just happen around urban centers, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
lightning strikes.
Okay, so you get lightning strikes. What's the average life cycle in Canada of a forest fire I'm assuming if it's outside of an urban center, we don't send somebody to deal with it.
Oh no! When a forest fire starts, irregardless of where it starts in Canada, a crew is sent in to deal with it because there's fires that start in Alberta that burn into Manitoba and across into Saskatchewan. Some of them will burn down into the peat moss all winter, burn 20 feet under the ground and pop up again in the spring when the snow's gone. So those fires, no matter where they start, they all have the potential to make their way into urban areas. A fire can do one heck of a pile of damage and they can cover a lot of ground. The big issue down there they have in California is they knew this time of year that they were going to have winds 80 to 100 miles an hour. And when you get 80 to 100 miles an hour wind, you can't put men on the ground in front of it. They'll be killed. There's only very limited aircraft that can do anything aerial. A lot of times, to be honest with you, in cases like that, you got to stand back and watch things burn.
I guess that was my question. Like if there's a forest fire in the northernmost part of BC, I don't know, Northwest Territories, Yukon, is it always dealt with?
I don't know of any cases where they're not. But what happens is, I'll give you an example. The priority last big fire, campaign fire I was on in Alberta, the priority that they had was homes first, and then it was structures, and then they had 3 different parameters. One of them was structures. They were always the priority. And if fire was threatening an area, they would put more assets in there. But if it was just going to burn a forest area, and let's say it was going to burn something over and maybe it was going to burn 10,000 acres, but you knew that was going to run up against a series of lakes and go out. Then the decision would have to be made. Can we pull the resources in to fight that one with that fire hazard as high as it is, and then leave other areas in urban areas unprotected? So they wouldn't get the same amount of attention as an urban wildfire interface, a potential, that's going to burn down homes, but there would still be a campaign mounted. It just wouldn't be at the same level as a fire that was going to be threatening structures.
And what province has the most forest fires? Is it BC?
Do you know what? I don't have the updated data on that. That would be on the CIFC site. Normally it runs between BC and Alberta, have the most. And like I said, statistically, the amount of fires we have continued to go down while the size keeps going up. And the size keeps going up because I'll give you an example. Nowadays, you can buy drones that are used that you can put a torch system on them and fly them out 15 kilometers and start fires with them and get them back to where you are and be gone, and nobody knows how the fire gets started. And you can start the fire halfway up a tree. So it looks like a lightning strike.
That was actually going to be my question. It seems like the perfect crime. Like, it's because the fire destroys almost all the evidence, right?
Well, it depends what you have. Like in Quebec, when those fires started, you had point of ignition that you could go back to for an investigation. Some of the bigger fires, if depending on wind conditions, you might not be able to, you can do close, but trying to go back sometimes and find the exact point of ignition is not easy. And if you can, it makes it a lot harder to determine, but it could be any number of things. A lot of the fires in really dry conditions will start by lightning, but none of the ones that down in LA indicated were started by lightning. They were virtually all arson. It's that simple.
So I kind of don't want you to, don't tell us how you start a forest fire. I don't want to get the RCMP showing up. I tried to start I had to burn some, some logs and whatnot. And I tried starting a fire with gasoline. It's not that easy because it seeps into the soil. You're worried it splashes on your hands. You got to go inside, wash your hands. By the time you come out, it's evaporated. How do you have to literally find an eco-terrorist to teach you, or is they all come from the military?
No, it's posted online every day. It's forest fire weather indexes. I mean, you go online every day, it'll tell you, is this good weather to start a forest fire?
Okay, so it's.
I don't want to tell people too much more than that. But after 9/11, the U.S. ran some training about terrorists, and they said the number one tool for terrorism predicted over the next 30 years in the U.S. This was back in 2001, would be forest fires.
It's just very difficult to prevent, right?
Cost you a match. Oh. And it costs billions and billions into the economy. I mean, seriously, look at what it just cost. What it just cost LA, and then look at Lahaina, and then look what happened to us out in Banff, right? And then 2 years ago, Nova Scotia had its largest fire in its history, and the Trudeau government wanted to blame it on climate change. Well, it turns out it was arson. And you'll find almost all these big fires, in most cases, you're going to find out that it was arson. Just saying.
What's the solution? Is it the government basically is going to turn around and say your only salvation is going to a 15-minute urban center?
Right now, there's a lot of people actually jumping for joy down in LA because all these properties that were burnt down right now, BlackRock and other speculators are trying to buy up that land for pennies on the dollar. And it allows them to put trams out there. It allows them to put in skyscrapers. There's a whole bunch of things. If you look at Agenda 2030 and you look at what the plans for 15-minute cities, all these places burning down, that just the number one way to destroy a society and rebuild it is burn it to the ground, because there's not a lot of deconstruction when it comes to ashes. In the art of war, you got to remember that fire is a military tool, and both the Canadian government and the U.S. government have plans on how to use fire to burn people out. I don't mean to sound territorial, but I'm just telling you straight up facts. I'm not making any assumptions. I'm just telling you that there's strategic military plans on how to burn enemy forces out, and they have equipment to light forest fires behind them and in front of them, wherever the wind's blowing. I mean, if you got a bunch of men hidden in the woods, the easiest way to get them out is set the woods on fire. It's not rocket science. As a matter of fact, the Sun Tzu talks about it in the art of war. You either flood them out or you burn them out.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought. Um, Peter, what are we at? We're at 45 minutes. Can you give us a, well, first of all, did your court case come and pass in over there in Nova Scotia?
No, we're the Independent Nova Scotia Initiative, and a number of complainants will be in court on February the 14th in Port Hawkesbury. And at that point, they will be getting directions for a judicial review that's been approved. And so hopefully the judicial review will find the errors that the government made in calling the provincial election. And there's a lot more that's going to come out of this, and I don't want to tip our hat too much, but we're highly confident that some serious changes are going to be made in how elections take place in Nova Scotia. And I would suggest that there will be a number of heads roll for what happened. Got to remember, 18 independent candidates who should have been on in a field of 55 candidates weren't allowed to run. And so right now it's looking like a Section 3 charter violation and a couple of violations inside the Elections Act. So there's a lot of injured parties and there are a lot of things to be settled. But fortunately, that judicial inquiry is in front of a Supreme Court judge, and we'll see where all that goes. But I'm pretty confident that there's going to be some unhappy politicians when we finish with them. Just saying.
Music to my ears. Unhappy
politicians.
politicians.
It'd be nice. I mean, something has to get fixed, Payman. Right? So here we are in Canada right now. We've got a prorogue government. Now, a good piece of news, by the way, the JCCF managed to get their court case approved. On that proroguement, they are actually in court, I think, first week of February, and a judge can overturn that and force Parliament back to work. And what they're basing it on is Boris Johnson, when Brexit was taking place, he prorogued government because he didn't want to take the heat from other politicians in the press. So he tried to prorogue, and it went back. They got that in front of judges, and 11 out of 11 Supreme Court judges overturned the proroguement, said it was unjustified, and they can do it here in Canada. And if that's the case, a judge can order them back to work the next day, which opens the door for a vote of non-confidence to get rid of Trudeau before they have before they have their leadership convention.
What is the legitimate argument in support of proroguing Parliament?
Legitimately, I don't have a full understanding of it, but I do understand that if there's another way around solving an issue, that the Governor General is not supposed to approve it, because what happens is he prorogued Parliament to solve problems inside his party. And my understanding is that you can only prorogue Parliament if you've reached an impasse between all of the parties, and there's no pathway inside the parliamentary system to resolve the issues. And that's not what he did. He just went, I'm going to tell everybody I'm going to resign. Let's bring in Mark Carney. Let's stretch things out. I can still get everything I want done, and I don't have to deal with the press, and I don't have to worry about a non-confidence vote. So basically what he did was every possible thing he could to spit in the face of every Canadian. And our Governor General, who's another DEI hire, had the option to say, no, I'm not proroguing. She just didn't have to accept that. And so I'm hoping that what comes out of this JCCF, this Justice Committee group, Justice Center, I think, for Constitutional Fairness. I'm not sure what it stands for. It's JCCF. And it's a couple of lawyers. They initially got turned down, but I think that they're going to be able to force the government to go back to work. It's a really, really good thing. And I can tell you one thing: it's the best possible thing that would happen for Canada. Right? I'd like to see them go back in time, and maybe, if they do go back and they do go for a non-confidence vote, if they can get it done in time before the end of February, then it means that Jagmeet Singh and his band of, his band of 40 thieves, Alibaba and his band of 40 thieves won't be getting their pension.
Also music to my ears. One other thing I'll add, the Governor General, I believe she's Inuit, and Trudeau gave her band 20 million acres. This ties into UNDRIP. it ties into China, and it ties into these, 51st state argument where Trump is thinking, all right, China comes in, sets up a base there. I can't have that. Like all this is all destabilizing the country.
Well, you got to remember that Trump only asked for two things. He said, fix your immigration issues, right? Because right now, there's 4 times as many terrorists go into the U.S. from Canada as come in from Mexico. 4 times as many. Most people aren't aware that 283,000 legal passports that you could fill the data in was stolen from Canadian Border Services, and that was kept under wraps until the whistleblower came out about 2 weeks and blew the whistle on it. You don't even hear about it in mainstream media. 283,000 passports. And if people think Donald Trump's people didn't tell him that happened, so he knows, okay, you've got 283,000 more terrorists that can come in through Canada's lax immigration system. So Trump said, fix your system and stop bringing in fentanyl that are killing our people. 300,000 people a year now get killed in the U.S. by fentanyl overdoses. That's 5 times as many U.S. soldiers that were killed in the Vietnam War. He said, fix the 2 problems. Other than that, you're going to get a tariff, 25%. And he's saying other things because he knows that we don't have the military anymore to protect up around Greenland and those straits that are covered right now with U.S. and Chinese and Russian vessels. And he realizes that our military can't protect themselves. And he is right about the deficits. But all that Trudeau would have to do is hire someone like Tom Holdman down in the U.S., the border czar, and say, fix our border, right? Just hire somebody who has a proven track record of getting things done, who's not a DEI hire, and say, get it done. Here's your budget. Here's your timelines. I do not care how you get it done. Get it done. Fix our border crisis. We'll get out of your way. You're not going to have to answer to idiots, which is normally what the federal government does. You give a guy a job and then you put all these roadblocks and he can't do it. They just need to get out of his way and then say, and then we need the fentanyl problem fixed. And you don't fix the fentanyl problem by having the RCMP go out and buy Chinese drones to fly along our border. When it's the Chinese sending fentanyl into Canada, that finds its way down into the U.S. The RCMP literally went out and bought a bunch of Chinese-made drones that they're going to send up to try to find out who's sending through fentanyl stuff. You can't make this stuff up.
Why do you think do you think the RCMP was that incompetent, or are they just trying to troll the Americans?
What happens is a lot of guys go into I worked with a lot of good Mounties over my career, guys that, they get in, they wanted to make a difference. But what ends up happening, you can't move into the upper echelons. You can't get promotions now in the RCMP unless you buy into the total woke DEI hiring agenda. So everybody right now, because it started in the mid-90s, that's in the upper brass, all RCMP are woke tards. They're dangerous. Right? I'm just going to say it the way it is. And this is not an affront to the guys I used to work with, because those guys, I worked with some really good men who were doing some really good work. But everybody across all upper echelons now in the RCMP are woke. You can't be promoted unless you bought into it 100%. So what you have is, this asking your supervisor permission to speak freely. You don't get much of that anymore. That's why down in the U.S., for example, Pete Hegseth just took over the military. He's going to probably fire 40 generals here very shortly. Everybody who touched the Afghan withdrawal, they're done. Anybody who's been going around, teaching people, or allowing men to wear dresses and all that kind of stuff, that's all over. Woke's over in the U.S. And nobody in Canada, rather than say, yeah, you know what, it's time to turn things around. I mean, we're doubling down. We want to bring in as many transvestites into Canada as possible for a safe zone to come up here. I don't know where they're going to put them in, upper senior level management positions in the federal government, I'm assuming. Like, you got to remember what happened out in Jasper. Nobody got fired. Nobody.
Kirk Reese mentions don't forget the land acknowledgements.
Well, how many billions of dollars are we talking? At what point does the government make an arrangement and say, this is where it all ends? Right? I mean, the way I look at it is this, Payman. If my great-great-great-great-grandfather did something wrong to your great-great-great-grandfather, what's that got to do with me and you? Is that just me who thinks that way? Right? I mean, I'm just tired of paying for other people's mistakes that were done hundreds of years ago. I mean, there's got to be a cutoff point somewhere. I mean, I know that's probably going to get me in a lot of trouble saying that, but the reality of it is I don't believe anybody should have rights that I don't have. As a matter of fact, even under our charter, the rights that I thought we have, those aren't charters. The notwithstanding clause, those are privileges that you have until the government says they're not your privileges anymore. The guy to ask about that is Brian Peckford, who just lost the case in the Supreme Court about what happened with COVID. And now our courts are packed with libtards that started getting put in there in the 90s, woke judges. You know, they just made a decision that even in our Constitution that said our Constitution's based on God, they just come out and said, well, nobody was quite clear what God means. Who is God? And then they just changed the Constitution based on that. And Brian Peckford said, well, we were, you know, everybody who signed that was a Christian person and thought we knew what we meant. Well, that was before wokeness creeped into everything. And so wokeness is meritocracy is a pillar that supports productive and successful societies. DEI crashes that pillar. So now we had a three-legged stool, and meritocracy was one of the strongest legs on the stool, and that leg's gone now. So we just balance, and anything could blow it over. And I'm watching what's happening. You know, how is it possible that someone like Chrystia Freeland, who was coached by the way, he was coached by Mark Carney. She was coached by Mark Carney on this last budget, and they blew it by $22 billion in excess of they had projected. So that's $22,000 million they didn't get it right by, and he coached her. And the only reason that she quit because Trudeau said, "I'm going to fire you for it," and she's thinking, well, it was Mark Carney who told me what to do. He's your buddy. She didn't put that in the letter, but the reality of it was is Mark Carney coached her on the budget. He was hired as a Liberal consultant. So that budget mess, imagine she's got the gall, the temerity to go back and want to run and say, hire me. I just blew your budget by 22,000 million. That's how bad I am. And you know, hire me again. I mean, hire me again. It's so outrageous. That's what's happening is to go back what you said. I don't think Trump will allow it to happen.
Yeah, this is like taking failing upwards to just the next level. Like you said, $22 billion. Guilbeault, what did he invest? $750 million in his own company. $6 billion was misplaced by Freeland.
There's billions and billions that it's not that they can't get it back. They don't even know where it went. Billions and billions and billions of taxpayers' dollars, and people forget how many a billion is. Right? A billion is 1,000 million. How does anybody blow a budget by 22,000 million and then just go, oopsie, I'm going to quit today and I'm your savior now? I mean, 9 years of, you got to remember every single person that's running in the Liberal Party right now supported every bit of it. We got a mess to fix, buddy boy. I don't know how to do it. If somebody wants to know how to fix it, buy a copy of that book because there's a solution in there. Don't get a copy, though, for your Liberal friends because they will. Well, let me put it to you this way. Buy it for them in the winter and not the summer. Because if they read that in warm weather and their head explodes, they could start a forest fire. And if they do, there won't be anybody there to put it out.
You could buy the book, get it off Amazon. You can give it to every Liberal friend that you have.
You can actually got a good Liberal friend of mine who actually bought it and bought 6 copies for other Liberal friends. And I haven't heard back from any of them. I haven't been invited to the parties as of yet. So you know what? That stuff needs to be said. It's not politically correct. Didn't win me any favors from government. I can tell you that. Got a bullseye on my back. I can guarantee it. I'm surprised that it hasn't been banned in Canada yet. But anyways, it's an enjoyable read. I'm working on another book right now too, and hope to have it out to market here by February 19th. So we'll see what happens. And I'd like to get back with you after court, and if we have any more update stuff, Payman, I'm more than happy to discuss it.
I'm always here if you ever want to talk, Peter. I don't know. Are you a private person? Is there a place that the audience can go to learn more about you or reach out to you?
Actually, there's way more about me on Google than I'm happy to see. There's a ton of it on there. But if I'm over on, I think I had I'm at Peter MacIsaac on X. Other than that, if you really need to find me, find me over on X, and I don't want to put up my email because I get too many wingnuts trying to get hold of me on email. I mean, if it's important, you'll find me.
Well, you can catch him back here in a few weeks after his court case.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the invite, payment. And like I said, guys, put a pin on it, mark it down, because I guarantee you with the Liberals struggling coming into this next thing, you can expect a lot of forest fires this summer.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Peter, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here.
Thank you, buddy. Anytime. Thanks, payment. Talk to you, bud.
Take care.